going to be talking about our sink or swim candidates for each NHL team. That is going to be in the Canadian division. Now, one thing to note about the Canadian division is that each of these teams are not just playoff hopefuls, but I think each one of these teams sees themselves in a normal division alignment.
Each?
Okay, not each. Sorry, Ottawa being a little bit of an after thought there. No disrespect for what they're doing. Think they're building really the right way, but 6 of the 7 Canadian teams.
Just real quick, you may notice the Canadians logo on my mug here. If Cam had a logo on his, it would be a Senators logo. So I just really quickly want to address that, no matter which team you're representing as a fan, we hope that this will be a podcast where you feel like it's represented well. It gets pretty tiring, I think, to, be listening to coverage of one form or another, and it feels like if, if it's not specifically tailored to your team, you feel like, maybe not always a fair representation. So we're going to give that our best go. If you feel like we haven't, feel free to let us know in the comments or whatever. But
yeah, this is going to be pretty intense, and so I think there's going to be some pretty fierce rivalries. I think there could be some disappointments in terms of playoffs, and I just really think that it's going to be fun to get into the sink or swim to see what can make the difference for each one of these teams coming up. So
I'm pulling out
here
the Senators lines.
Okay.
Why don't you take it away? Those are your boys. So wow, that's a nice little the daily face-off lines.
Yes.
Have been updated with the new jerseys, and they look sharp.
Those slap.
Yeah, they are gorgeous. I love the new jerseys.
At first, I felt like it was a little bit underwhelmed personally as a Sens fan, but it's so clean.
Yeah, this is more,
and that's what it's about. The reverse retros, not crazy, but as a kit, they work really nicely. It all just ties in really well, even though it's nothing too super duper wild.
Mm-hmm.
And some of you might be a bit surprised. I guess I'm more willing to take a couple runs at the Sens because they're my team, because I've had a little chirps along the way if you've been listening to our whole pod here. But I don't think it's a hot take at all. I think it's a hot take to not have Senators come in 7th here in the Canadian division, 7 out of 7. I know that you've had maybe some reservations, a team like Edmonton totally imploding and capitulating on their season. But to me, I feel like Eugene Melnyk expressed what most Sens fans feel, which was the Ralphie meme from The Simpsons where I'm in danger. It's just so much like the feel on the thought of a Canadian division. It's like the Detroit and Ottawa could exchange a few wins at least with each other, right? And there could be other more bottom feeding teams, or at least in I think a traditional setup, Ottawa might feel more comfortable stealing wins on some nights. But then again, right, anything can happen. DJ Smith has just been incredible at instilling a good work ethic, and there's a lot of things I think to like about Ottawa. As I mentioned, I think number one starts with there's been really good coaching and culture that's been instilled. We've seen that change a lot since the Uber drive in Phoenix, where they were beaking the power play coach.
What a mess.
I think we've seen quite a transition from that.
Yeah.
Some of it is to do with the exodus of players, a lot of fan favorites. But I think there's a lot of reason for optimism. Definitely some luck and some provision through the San Jose Sharks and the way that pick has just become so valuable. I'm sure there's other things, as a Sens fan personally, I could nitpick where it's like, well, we had the Islanders' first pick, and like, how the heck did they get to the Eastern Conference Finals? We were hoping that was going to be kind of a mid-teens pick, or also, right, like little things like San Jose was a couple games shy of making the Stanley Cup Finals, which would mean that Ottawa would have San Jose's pick in this upcoming draft as well. So there's little things that you could maybe nitpick, stuff like that, but lots of reason to be optimistic here. We've got, like Josh Norris looks just so good. Watched him live a couple games last season, and for whatever he doesn't have in size compared to Logan Brown, his IQ is on par, if not better, than Logan Brown.
Just auto-corrected what you said to Logan Paul. Different piece.
Yeah, maybe they can get him to replace Scott Sabrin and fight some guys. They're aligned, I don't know. Scott Sabrin, hope you're doing well. Yeah, so this guy's just got like the speed and also the mental speed to be able to make plays at high pace.
Logan Paul?
No, Josh Norris. And so I think that's really interesting. Another underrated factor is he and Brady Tkachuk had really good chemistry at the World Junior Champions, and so I think a lot of people are excited about that. We'll see. I don't know if his ceiling's that high. Tkachuk is clearly a first-line player. We don't want to load too much expectations, I think, on Norris, but like you were saying about some other players being make or break, the other player I alluded to, Logan Brown, one of the many Browns that are playing on Ottawa. A lot of people feel like this is a make or break year. His IQ, his passing is just unreal. Doesn't maybe use his size as much. He's 6'6", and he doesn't use it as much physicality, and his foot speed is maybe average at best. So there's some things where there's a lot of players. I think Sens fans are going to be really tolerant of most of the guys coming up, and whatever success they do or do not have. Jake Batherson's another guy who I'm super excited about. He was leading the AHL in points before he got called up. Yeah.
He's a bit older, right? Like 24?
No, he's not quite that old. I think he's 22 this year. He might be turning 23 this coming season.
In his fourth, I don't know what I was thinking about. Carry on. No idea.
All good. So I think most of those players, there's really temperamental expectations. I think Ottawa's done a good job where guys like Josh Brown, Goodbranson, and other pieces are there to be a bit of an insulation. I think the only player that Ottawa's going to get like really excited about and that I'd like them to just be patient is Tim Stützle. We won't see kind of how he will go. I think he's going to be a really good player, but I would just preach patience for him, but it's going to be good. Sink or swim candidates in this situation, I think, are pretty hard. I think the expectations are low. They brought in two rather good players, in my opinion, this offseason that have maybe to some been a bit of a surprise. First of all, they brought in Evgeny Dadonov, who I really have loved as a player for quite some time. He's one of those low maintenance players who just always brings it in practice in a game. It's a player that a coach doesn't need to spend too much time working on or worrying about, because he's just a consummate professional. So I think that's going to resonate really well in Ottawa. But I do need to acknowledge he's not playing with the quality of teammates that he saw. Right, Tkachuk is a really good player, definitely a different style as a Huberdeau and Barkov type, where Barkov's been one of the best centers in the league. Bit of a downtrend year this year, And Huberdeau is one of the top wingers in the NHL, undoubtedly, over point per game player at this point in his career. And so it'll be really interesting to see how he'll adjust. So it seems like a sink or swim candidate is going to have a lot to do with the insulation that Ottawa's brought around. So it's either between Dadonov or another guy like Matt Murray. Now, Matt Murray, obviously his pedigree is going to be touted because he's got 2 cup wins, and it's not like he was riding the pine for that team, but he actually took over in significant moments for Pittsburgh and was key in them hoisting both of their cups. So it feels like of all the different plot lines we could talk about today, we're just talking about sink or swim candidates, that it's between those 2 players. Now, we were talking about heat maps before. Dadonov's first year in the league that he played, he had the ideal heat map, like the exact opposite of Sami Niku. What I was describing is that he was just extremely productive in the offensive zone and extremely good in the defensive zone. There wasn't many goals or chances that were given up when he was on the ice from anywhere. Again, he had some great line mates that he was playing with, and they were exploiting a lot of teams in all areas of ice on the offensive end. So he could make things a lot easier, and I think 3 years, it's an adequate amount of time. I don't think there's very much pressure on Dadonov. Hopefully that doesn't mean he coasts at this point in the career. I don't think Ottawa is necessarily a retirement destination coming from Florida, so I think he's still got a bit of a motor. So I'm actually, between these 2 candidates, I'm going to go with Matt Murray. And so I think one of the biggest things is if you are playing hockey and your team's working hard, making sure that you've got a goalie who is stopping pucks and rewarding you for all the hard work that you as a player are putting in the offensive zone and the defensive zone is incredibly important. You were alluding to teams that you played for earlier in the pod. I've played for teams where there was a goalie on our team, obviously better than I could ever play at net. I was a forward. And every time, about 7 times that season, there was a puck coming right at the shoulder, and he'd be outside of his paint, just like a shot on net from outside the blue line, and it hit the blocker, go up, over, and in.
7 times?
7 times in the season. You just watch the puck go 10 feet in the air and come down into the net, and it's just so demoralizing. We're playing on a different team where we outshoot the other team by 20 shots, but the game would be tied because as long as you could keep the puck on the ice, it was going in on this goaltender. So there's a lot of times where I think that hard work needs to be rewarded by having a player who's not a sieve in net. And when I've done some digging on Matt Murray, I haven't loved what I saw. So there's a bit of a debate that could be had. Is Matt Murray a good goaltender who's struggling right now, or was Matt Murray a goaltender who got hot at the right time? And so this is an even bigger question because of the news that Anders Nilsson, who's been a nice little piece for Ottawa, is still experiencing concussion-like symptoms. Hochberg's been nice. He's a bit of an undersized goalie. So Matt Murray is going to be expected to carry a lot of the load, and it would be really nice if he could steal games. But I've gone into some of his diving. He's got an average, maybe even slightly below average, high danger chance save percentage. He's in that 8.26, which is fine. But if you look at some of his numbers and just his expected goals and compared to his actual goals allowed is in the negatives. And I think the biggest tell, if I'm just pulling up the numbers here in front of me, is that he is right near the bottom of the league for average goal distance. And by bottom of the league, I mean like he's typically letting in shots from 25 0.01 feet away, whereas goalies like Lehner and a lot of, I guess, the typical backup goalies are letting in an average goal from about 15 feet or so, and then we see a lot of the starters in the league are usually in that 19-foot range. So we see Jari, Gibson, Hellebuck, Demko, Anderson, Kemper, right? Samsonov, they're all in that 19-20-foot range, and Matt Murray's letting in shots from 5 feet further. And so his what I draw from that is that because his high danger save percentage is decent, but his average goal distance is pretty far away, and he's had quite a few goals against. Matt Murray appears to be letting in some softer goals compared to other goalies. Now could be a bit of a turnaround in how that looks, I guess, upcoming, but I would be concerned that if Matt Murray's letting in a lot of goals from distance, that this could really do in and damage a lot of what DJ Smith is building. So I'd love to see him swim, but it's kind of hard not to think that this could also sink a lot of what they're wanting to do. So, and I guess if you wanted to also play devil's advocate, you could say not having an AHL or East Coast or junior league is also a pretty sink or swim, because Ottawa's ascertained a lot of prospects that it's going to be hard for them to get playing time. Some are overseas, some are in college, but with a lot of the juniors and a lack of AHL, like Belleville was on its way to possibly making a deep postseason run. They were second or third in the AHL, and they had 2 rookies making the All-Star team there, and so they've got a lot of good pieces, and I hope that they find a way to develop, and some good can come out of prospect development for this season, because it would be a real shame, and it was a real shame that Belleville didn't garner that playoff experience in the AHL last year. But we're at where we're at, and I think what could have Ottawa be anything but 7th lies on Matt Murray's shoulders, and that's maybe a tough place to be for a guy who's leading a championship pedigree team with his own struggles. So
I would say that, so he's leaving a championship pedigree team. I don't think I agree with that. I had the pleasure of watching my Habs embarrass the Penguins in the return to play. Their defense was horrible. It was so bad.
Yeah.
Anytime there's like a super weird stat, like the distance one you mentioned, I just can't help but wonder, is there like a systemic reason for it? Like, I'm going to use one example. It is night and day different situation, but talking about Joel Edmondson, who the Habs recently picked up this year, you will find very divisive takes on his evaluation, and Matt Murray's similar in that people are high if they're high and they're low if they're low. And one of the reasons I believe for the range in takes on Joel Edmondson is because he went from being a very solid defenseman in St. Louis who play a zone defense to a pretty solid but statistically worrisome defenseman in Carolina on a man-to-man defense. And so I'm going to use an example not everyone will be able to directly relate to, but hopefully it makes some sense. I played some basketball in high school, and not very great or high level or anything. Like I mentioned a while ago, grew up in a quite small town, but typically in low-level high school basketball, you play man-to-man defense or you play zone defense. And I was quite comfortable in a zone defense. I would just kind of, I was sort of, I'm not that tall, but I was sort of tall early, and so I was always a center, and so I just camped right in the middle, and all you had to be aware of was kind of if was anyone running through, cutting through. You just had to be, you pretty much stayed put and were just sensing what was going on around you and reacting to it. Playing a zone, you're doing all those things, but now you have your man. I'm sorry, I'm not sure if I just said zone or man, but now I'm talking about a man. When you're in a man-to-man, you have a guy who you're following, and so not only are you keeping your eye on everything going around you on the ice, you're also keeping an eye on where your guy is and your position relative to him. You have to be very spatially aware. It's like playing a different game.
Right.
It's so incredibly different. And Joel Edmondson is much, much more effective in the zone defense.
Right.
So I say all of this because, we've talked so far in the podcast about how I mentioned James Reimer is a guy who he needs a lot of shots on net to be effective.
Right.
Like, these players are human beings, and humans are so different. Like, there's got to be something systemic or personally about him in terms of situations that are good or bad. Like why is he better in playoff hockey?
Right.
Is it a mental thing, or is it something about the style of play?
Right.
Like the crease and the slot is often more packed in playoff hockey. Maybe that's helping prevent some of these. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Maybe the defensemen typically are more reserved. They aren't as aggressive. Maybe they're there to help clear guys in front who are screening more. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Maybe Pittsburgh's garbage defense this year meant they just couldn't clear the crease, and so he was constantly screened. Like, people use advanced stats to analyze goalies, but there is no stat that accounts for screening.
Yeah.
Like, that's a huge part of the game.
Yeah.
Like, you just can't account for that. So we just don't know. And so I guess this is now 2 teams in a row where we have the same sinkers from candidate.
Okay.
For me, it's Murray as well. And the reason I'm mentioning these things is not because I think he's going to be... has he been an all-star?
We'll look that up.
I think he might have been, but he's been very highly regarded around the league as like a good starter.
Right.
I don't think he's going to be that. But people who are negative on him, like I said before, are real negative, and I don't think he's going to be that either. Like, I think this guy can play, but for me, the question comes into, you mentioned before, did he get hot at the right time? I think he did. And that, to me, I think he's an average goalie, not because he's putting up average stats every night, but because he steals games and he gives games away. And to me, the amount of both of those that he's doing is going to determine everything about the season for the Senators, because, like, I think there's a timeline out there where they finish like 5th. I don't think there's any timeline where they make the playoffs, but I think I'm higher on them than you are.
Yeah.
I see this as a bit of a throwback to the pesky Sens days, where they are just going to, like, you look at the identity of the defenseman.
Montreal would know a lot about the pesky Sens.
Yes.
Unfortunately, not a jab, but it is a jab.
I'll move. the Vietnam cat meme right now. Yeah, you look at the identity of the players these guys are adding. Like, why did they want Dadonov, and why did Dadonov consider signing with them?
Yeah,
I think because the narrative of this team being trash is I don't think it's accurate anymore.
No.
I think if this is a normal season, I think they finish like 19th in the league.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because
maybe I'm just protecting myself with my fandom here, but I I was trying to negotiate, like, how do we get above 25,
Right.
like, realistically. And
I think it's just because they're going to be just hard to play against.
Yeah,
And
I agree.
And that, being a Habs fan, that's a bit of a meme-y phrase because Bergevin for so long has pushed like identity and like so many different kind of intangible things. I think the Senators this year are going to have the intangibles where you've got a mix of veterans and kids. For some reason, you have Alex Galchenyuk, which was a weird ad.
That was pretty strange.
I don't think he fits anything, but like
they love those third overall draft picks though. You've got good Branson there as well.
Yeah.
So they're just like they like the number 3, I guess.
Yeah, but you've got so many guys who are tough to play against, and I think that's just going to make teams make mistakes. That's going to I don't think they're. I think Toronto's going to beat them way more often than they're going to lose to them.
Right.
But they're going to Toronto's going to lose to Ottawa a disproportionate amount compared to where they should finish in the standings. Because
that's fair.
They're going to make teams make mistakes.
Yeah, I can get on board with that, and I also think like they do have an element where they're. I mean, you want to say it's the NHL and everyone takes every game seriously, but it's difficult for some athletes to not take certain competition lightly. To take another run here, like how many wins did Montreal have in Detroit last year?
They got swept.
Right? Like, so it's a real thing. Where Ottawa could have a bit of an advantage where they might be taken lightly for a bit and be able to rack up a few points, and that could build some synergy and some culture to see. Again, playoffs likely out of reach, especially in this division.
Where did the Blue Jackets finish this year?
The Blue Jackets were 9th. They were just after Toronto.
Right.
Or just ahead of Toronto, maybe. They were 8th.
I could see them being next year like the Blue Jackets were this year. And this year being just a step behind.
Interesting.
Where in terms of like they have a roster that really gets written off.
Yeah.
But they just a bit of that Islanders effect. Maybe they're a bit more than the sum of their parts. Like you mentioned before, DJ Smith is going to have them in a competitive.
Yeah.
And like it's not like they're guys who are going to be mailing it in because so many of them are kids who have so much to prove.
Yeah.
And you're in a hockey market and you're playing.
And there's a lot of prospects. Like there's a lot of people vying for jobs, and there's not very many jobs when you look at how deep this prospect pool is. It's been lauded by people like Pronman as being in the top 5 for sure. So internally there should be a lot of reason.
Oh yeah.
There's going to be some disappointment. There's going to be some players that fans are really vying for that are going to get overtaken by other prospects just because they're going to have that drive a little bit more. But
like the energy
that internal competition is good. It's really
huge.
Important. It's gonna help a growing team.
Like the energy that that preseason games can have, where there's like a lot of fights and that's going to be just the Senators every night. I'm not saying they're going to be fighting, but people are just going to be like, this is where I could earn a spot.
Yeah, and Brady Tkachuk's going to want a lot of money, so I think you're going to see him get real feisty, get his nose into a lot of different things. So love him as a player.
All that said, I haven't talked about Matt Murray a lot. That's why I see him as a sink or swim, because if that's your identity, what if you were just hard to play against all game?
Yeah.
And then Murray lets in a softie, and say you were down 3-2, pressure.
Yeah.
Murray lets in a softie.
Yeah.
What if that happens 2 times a week?
That's exactly what I was getting at, and I used a really specific stat to back up what I was saying, which was distance. Right, his high danger seems all right.
Yeah.
But like Tristan Jarry, for juxtaposition, is letting in goals at 19 feet, where Murray's 25. So does a player and this is a real thing we see as well, right? Like with Toronto's backup situation, once McElhinney left, Anderson was in net, and then when Anderson wasn't in net, this team played completely different, right? When he wasn't, they couldn't essentially win without Anderson. And
Yeah.
so there could be some of that, like the players are really struggling to have Matt Murray's back, I guess, or to play with the same kind of, if you're too concerned about not getting scored on, then you're not as concerned about scoring goals, right? So
Right.
it's tough to say, but like those are some elements where, we've both got our eye on that Murray, maybe for different reasons. We think that he'll succeed or fail.
I think it's the same reason. I just maybe see what the rest of the team's able to do maybe a little bit more optimistically than you might. But no, I feel like they're going to be so much fun to watch. I think they're going to be, so like I guess the way I'm gauging their success is not even in terms of do they pull out of last place.
Yeah.
It's, is this a positive year for everyone's development?
Yeah.
And I think that playing scared would be bad for everyone's development. I was listening to a really, really interesting podcast that was comparing a lot of the really good young defensemen in the league, like Makar, Hughes, Sergachev was in there. And they were just talking about what would these guys look like if you switched the context that they got their start in. What would Sergachev look like if him and Makar swap places? Like,
right.
The way that you, the setting in which you land in the NHL and you orient yourself as an NHL player seems to be so important to the player you end up becoming.
Yeah.
And so if these kids land in this like dumpster fire, like if Murray just is throwing games away and you're playing scared and like playing when you don't want to make a mistake is a different kind of playing than focusing on the system and what you're like. It's such a different mindset.
For sure. Well, I mean, like Edmonton Oilers can definitely, right? Like it's like there's been a lot of suffering and a lot of mismanagement of assets because they were in an environment that was pretty dumpster fire for a long time. It's really good to see that they're changing, but so I think some culture on their side.
Exactly. Yeah, they do have culture on their side, but I think Matt Murray will be huge for having that continuing to be positive.
Well, it's kind of interesting. You had mentioned just Columbus a moment ago that they've cleared out a lot of cap space, which is very, very intriguing. Some people have asserted that, well, they've got a Werenski and they've got Jones coming up contractually. They still have to sign Dubois. But there is a lot of smoke being made by Friedge that it looks like they would like to get one of a Hoffman or Granlund to come because they feel very strongly that after Dubois is signed, whether he bridges or whether it's long term, that they're going to have some leftovers to offer a Hoffman or a Granlund position, and I really like that. So, because it was contested earlier that maybe Merzlikins or maybe Korpisalo might be on the market to bring in a forward. They've got Domi, right, which happened in the trade, but after they got Domi is when they were shipping out Nudi Vara and Ryan Murray, right, where they were clearing.
That was wild.
They cleared a bunch of money, and so it made you think, and it sounds like the impression is that Kekalainen is still big game hunting, right? He's wanting to make a bit of a splash, and it'll be good because whatever conference or division they end up with is going to be pretty feisty. And what's really strange, like as an aside from that, is like Columbus clearing all this cap space that they didn't really need to clear. No, that can be contested. I don't think it was urgent like other team situations, but what's strange is like a guy like Nunavara, who's a good defenseman, goes to Florida, who was rumored to be clearing $10 million cap space this offseason, and they have gained at least 10 mil, right? They've let a guy like Hollow walk, which seems a bit obtuse.
Yeah. Especially when wasn't he the return for
Trocheck. Yeah.
Who's a good piece.
Trocheck has been heralded by a few guys. One thing I found really fascinating is in a Keith Yandel interview, they asked him, who's the guy who's like you just can't get off his phone, and like you have to verbally remind him all the time to like get off his phone in the dressing room, at team dinners, whatever. They said it's Vincent Trocheck. So I wonder, that may or may not be related to like just where his mental space is on or off the ice, where they said, you know what, maybe this isn't great for us, but like we got to move on from him because we're not able to get out. And maybe, I don't know, maybe that trick is Cage. I'm not saying that's the issue, but I'm just trying to pull some threads, connect dots.
Well, like, I'm not saying he's an all-star, but he is a real NHL player. He is for sure a middle six center.
I think the trade might help wake him up a little bit. I think it's one of those situations, right? I'm trying to think of another example in the league where a team kind of knows that they're losing the trade, but they're not going to get what they want out of this asset when he's on their team.
Right. The Niederreiter trade?
Yeah. I think that's a good example there. So that's kind of just a few tangents when we're just trying to piece things. I mean, we're rent-free hockey, right? So it's like there's a lot of things that have been living rent-free in our heads.
Yeah, like especially Vincent Trocheck. Oh man, whatever happened to
Angs?
They had like the next Swedish top six center in Florida prospect.
Borgstrom? Borgstrom?
He was supposed to come in like this year or last year already and be like...
Yeah, I think he did play some last year, but
he wasn't very good.
Well, yeah, how much Florida news do you hear as well, right? So they'll be interesting. They've got Borgstrom, they've got Denisenko, they've got Heponiemi, who are all supposed to be coming down the middle, so they've got a couple nice pieces. Tippett's going to probably graduate this year. He was... AHL All-Star as a rookie, did really well, was I think second in the AHL rookie scoring behind Josh Norris, and Formanton I believe was third. So there's some really interesting things as we go.
Borgstrom played 50 games not this season but the one before and scored 18 points.
Okay.
As a 21-year-old.
Yeah.
And then this year he played 4 games and was held off the score sheet.
Okay.
He was minus 14, not this year, but the one before.
Oh.
And not in 4 games. That would be...
Yeah, that would be ridiculous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I don't know.